somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. On the morning of July 2, 1937, a voice crackled over a radio receiver. "We are on the line 157-337. We will repeat this message on 6210 kilocycles. We are running north and south." And then, nothing. No distress call, no farewell, no explanation, just silence. A silence that has lasted nearly 90 years. A silence that has never, not once, not fully, been broken. This is the story of Amelia Earhart, of her magnificent doomed aircraft, of the navigator who sat beside her, and of the vast, indifferent Pacific Ocean that swallowed them whole and has never given them back. Stay with me, because the closer you look at this story, the stranger it becomes. To understand what happened on July 2, 1937, you first need to understand who Amelia Earhart was and what she was trying to do. Born in Atchison, Kansas in 1897, Amelia Mary Earhart grew up in an era when flight was still a miracle. When the idea of a woman in a cockpit was not just unusual, it was, to many people, unthinkable. She didn't care. From the moment she saw her first airplane at a fairground at the age of 10, something shifted inside her. Something that would never shift back. She later wrote that she knew, in that moment, that the sky was where she belonged. She took her first flying lesson in 1921. She bought her first plane in 1922, a bright yellow biplane she called the Canary. And she began, quietly and methodically, to build a career that would make her the most famous aviator in the world. In 1928, she became the first woman to cross the Atlantic Ocean by air, as a passenger, which she herself openly admitted felt insufficient. She wanted to fly it, not ride it. So in 1932 she did, alone, in a single-engine Lockheed Vega, through ice and mechanical failure and 14 hours of terrifying Atlantic weather. She landed in a farmer's field in Northern Ireland, climbed out of the cockpit, and when the farmer asked where she had come from, she said simply, "America." But even that wasn't enough. By 1937, Amelia Earhart had set her sights on something no one had ever done: a flight around the entire world. Not just around it, but around it at the equator, the longest possible route. Approximately 29,000 miles of ocean, jungle, desert, and sky. And she had the aircraft to do it. The Lockheed Electra 10E, registration number NR16020. Say those letters and numbers to any aviation historian and watch their expression change. The Electra was, by any measure, an extraordinary aircraft. Built by the Lockheed Aircraft Company, it was a twin-engine, all-metal monoplane, a design that represented the absolute cutting edge of 1930s aeronautical engineering. Streamlined aluminum fuselage, twin tail fins, retractable landing gear, the kind of aircraft that looked, even on the ground, like it was already moving. The E variant that Earhart flew was powered by two Pratt & Whitney R1340 Wasp radial engines, robust, reliable power plants that gave the aircraft a cruising speed of around 190 miles per hour and a standard range exceeding 4,000 miles. But Earhart's Electra was not standard. Under the supervision of a young Lockheed engineer named Kelly Johnson, a man who would later become one of the most legendary aircraft designers in American history, the aircraft was transformed, rebuilt from the inside out for one purpose: to go farther than any aircraft of its kind had ever gone. The interior was stripped bare, seats removed, creature comforts eliminated. In their place, fuel tanks. Enormous, custom-fitted fuel tanks that lined the cabin walls and floor, running the full length of the fuselage. When fully loaded, the Electra could carry up to 1,200 gallons of aviation gasoline, 1,200 gallons. The aircraft that took off from most airports weighed around 10,500 pounds. Fully fueled for a transoceanic crossing, Earhart's Electra weighed nearly twice that. It also carried the most sophisticated navigational equipment available in 1937, a radio direction finder, Instruments for celestial navigation, the ancient art of using stars and sun to determine position over featureless ocean. A Bendix radio capable of transmitting and receiving on multiple frequencies. It was, for its time, the most prepared long-distance aircraft ever built. And yet, there were problems. Problems that some researchers, looking back, believe were never fully resolved before the flight departed. The radio direction finder, the device that would become critically important in the final hours, had reportedly been damaged during an earlier incident and may not have been functioning correctly. There were questions about whether Earhart fully understood how to use it at the frequencies being broadcast by the Coast Guard cutter Itasca, the ship that would be waiting for her at Howland Island. Questions that at the time seemed manageable. Questions that, in retrospect, loom very large. Beside Amelia Earhart in the cockpit sat Frederick Joseph Noonan, Fred Noonan. If Earhart was the most famous aviator in the world, Noonan was arguably the most skilled navigator. A former merchant marine officer and Pan American Airways route pioneer, he had helped chart some of the first transoceanic air routes across the Pacific, routes that commercial aviation would rely on for decades. He was 44 years old, experienced beyond measure, precise, meticulous. A man who could determine his position in the middle of a featureless ocean by looking at the stars with instruments and mathematics that seem almost magical to the modern mind. But Fred Noonan carried a shadow. He had a history of alcohol dependency, a fact that Pan American Airways had used as justification for his dismissal before he joined Earhart's expedition. Those close to him insisted he had overcome it, that he was clean, that he was sharp. Whether that shadow played any role in what happened on July 2, 1937, is something that historians have debated quietly for decades. We will never know for certain. What we do know is this. On the morning of their final flight, Fred Noonan was the best chance Amelia Earhart had of finding a tiny speck of land in the middle of the world's largest ocean. A speck of land called Howland Island. The world flight began on June 1, 1937, from Miami, Florida. Earhart and Noonan flew east, across the Atlantic, across Africa, across the subcontinent of India, across Southeast Asia. Leg by leg, stop by stop, they traced the equator around the globe. It was grueling. It was magnificent. By late June, they had reached Lae, in what is now Papua New Guinea. They had covered approximately 22,000 miles. They had crossed oceans and continents. They had dealt with mechanical issues, weather delays, and the relentless physical and mental exhaustion of long-distance flight. They were close. So close. Only 7,000 miles remained.
But those 7,000 miles were the hardest, because those 7,000 miles were almost entirely over open ocean. And the first leg, from Lae to Howland Island, was 2,556 miles of the most featureless, unforgiving water on Earth. Howland Island is, by any measure, one of the hardest targets in the world to navigate to. It's less than 2 miles long, half a mile wide. It rises barely 20 feet above the surface of the Pacific Ocean. From the air, it's virtually invisible, until you're almost directly above it. Finding it requires precision. It requires perfect navigation. It requires, above all, reliable communication with the ships and stations positioned along the route to help guide the aircraft in. On the morning of July 2, 1937, Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan climbed into the Electra at Lae. They'd been on the ground for 3 days, resting and preparing. At 0000 Greenwich Mean Time, 10 a.m. local time, the Electra's engines roared to life, and they took off into the sky. Nobody on the ground at Lae knew it yet, but they would never see that aircraft again. For the first several hours of the flight, everything appeared normal. Radio contact was maintained. The Electra was on course. The weather, while not perfect, was manageable. But as the hours wore on and the aircraft pushed deeper into the Pacific, something began to go wrong. The radio communications, already complicated by questions about frequency compatibility between the Electra's equipment and the Itasca's receivers, began to deteriorate. The Itasca, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter stationed near Howland Island specifically to guide Earhart in, was transmitting, broadcasting on the agreed frequencies, sending signals into the sky. But Earhart's responses were fragmentary, incomplete, growing more urgent. At 7:42 a.m. Howland Island time, the Itasca received a transmission. "We must be on you but cannot see you. Gas is running low." Gas is running low. Those 4 words. Out there, somewhere over the Pacific, the Electra's 1,200 gallons of fuel, enough to fly 4,000 miles, was running out. They had been in the air for nearly 20 hours. The engines were drinking the last of their reserves, and they could not find Howland Island. The Itasca responded, transmitted, sent homing signals into the air. At 7:58 a.m., another transmission from Earhart. "We are circling but cannot hear you." Circling. They were circling, which meant they believed they were close. They thought Howland Island was somewhere beneath them or near them, but the ocean all looks the same from the air, and a 2-mile-long strip of coral and sand is nothing against the vastness of the Pacific. At 8:43 a.m., the last confirmed transmission ever received from Amelia Earhart. "We are on the line 157-337. We will repeat this message on 6,210 kilocycles. We are running north and south." And then, nothing. The Itasca continued transmitting, continued calling, continued sending signals into the empty sky. No response came. The Pacific Ocean, vast, indifferent, eternal, gave nothing back. The search that followed was the largest air and sea search in United States naval history up to that point. Battleships, aircraft carriers, destroyers, minesweepers, aircraft flying grid patterns over hundreds of thousands of square miles of open ocean for 16 days. They found nothing. No wreckage, no oil slick, no debris field, no life raft, no signal, no body. Nothing. On July 18, 1937, the official search was called off. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan were declared missing. On January 5, 1939, a year and a half later, they were officially declared dead, and the Lockheed Electra 10E, registration NR16020, was listed as lost. But here's the thing about this story that makes it different from most aviation mysteries. It didn't end there. It has never ended. Because unlike most crashes, where wreckage is eventually found, where a cause is eventually determined, where a file is eventually closed, the disappearance of Amelia Earhart has produced no definitive answer. Not in 1937, not in 1967, not in 1997, not today. And in the absence of answers, something extraordinary happened. The theories began. Over the nearly 9 decades since Earhart vanished, researchers, historians, aviation experts, and devoted amateurs have proposed explanations ranging from the straightforward to the spectacular. Let me take you through them. The first theory, and the official one, is the simplest. Earhart and Noonan ran out of fuel while searching for Howland Island. Unable to locate their target due to navigation errors and radio communication failures, the Electra ditched in the ocean. The aircraft sank in deep water. The crew did not survive. This theory is supported by the known facts. The radio communications show increasing urgency. Fuel was clearly running low, and Howland Island is extraordinarily difficult to locate under the best conditions. The deep ocean around Howland, in places several miles deep, would have swallowed the aircraft without a trace. It is the most probable explanation. And it is, in many ways, the most heartbreaking, because it suggests that Amelia Earhart died not in some grand, mysterious conspiracy, but simply because she couldn't find a tiny island in a very big ocean. The second theory is the castaway hypothesis. In the 1980s and 1990s, a research organization called TIGAR, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, began investigating the possibility that Earhart and Noonan did not crash into the deep ocean at all, that instead they landed, or crash-landed, on a remote coral atoll called Nikumaroro, approximately 350 miles southeast of Howland Island. Nikumaroro, then known as Gardner Island, was uninhabited in 1937. It has a flat coral reef suitable for an emergency landing, and it lies along the navigational line, the 157-337 line that Earhart mentioned in her final transmission. TIGAR has made numerous expeditions to the island. They have recovered artifacts, fragments of aluminum, a zipper pull, pieces of glass, traces of makeup, that they believe may be consistent with Earhart's aircraft or personal effects. In 2018, a photograph emerged that some analysts believe shows the landing gear of the Electra submerged off the reef at Nikumaroro. More hauntingly, bones were found on Nikumaroro in 1940 by a British colonial officer. The bones were examined at the time and declared to be those of a male castaway. But the original measurements were preserved, and in 1998, a forensic anthropologist reanalyzed those measurements using modern techniques. Her conclusion was striking. The bones, she said, were more consistent with a tall woman of Northern European descent than with a male. The bones themselves have since been lost. The third theory is the most dramatic and the most controversial. It holds that Earhart and Noonan were on a secret intelligence mission for the United States government, that they were deliberately flying over Japanese-controlled islands in the Pacific to photograph military installations, that when their aircraft went down, the Japanese military captured them, and that they were held as prisoners or executed on the island of Saipan. This theory has been fueled by eyewitness testimonies, mostly gathered decades after the fact, from residents of Saipan who claim to have seen a white woman and a man held by Japanese authorities in the late 1930s. It has also been fueled by the extraordinary speed with which the U.S. Navy deployed a massive search fleet, a response that some find disproportionate to a simple missing aircraft, and more consistent with a government desperate to locate one of its own intelligence assets. The U.S. government has never confirmed any intelligence connection to Earhart's flight. But then, they wouldn't, would they? And then there is the fourth theory, the quietest one, the one that researchers rarely discuss openly, but that haunts the edges of every serious investigation. What if the answer is right there, in the ocean, and we simply haven't found it yet? The Pacific is deep, unfathomably deep. The search area around Howland Island encompasses thousands of square miles of ocean floor that has never been fully mapped, let alone searched with modern technology. In 2017, a deep-sea exploration team conducted sonar surveys of the ocean floor near Howland Island. In 2023, new expeditions using advanced underwater drones surveyed the area again. Nothing conclusive has been found, but the ocean is vast, and it keeps its secrets well. Let us return for a moment to the aircraft itself. The Lockheed Electra 10E, registration NR16020. It was a remarkable machine. Kelly Johnson, the engineer who supervised its modifications, would go on to design the U-2 spy plane and the SR-71 Blackbird. The Electra was, in some ways, the beginning of his extraordinary career. The aircraft had been rebuilt so completely for long-range flight that its cabin was a labyrinth of fuel tanks. Its instruments were the finest available. And yet, there are those who argue the modifications contributed to the disaster. The enormous fuel load made the aircraft dangerously heavy. At Leh, witnesses said it barely cleared the trees at the end of the strip. There is also the question of the antenna. Before departing Leh, Earhart left behind a trailing wire antenna, specifically designed to improve radio reception on lower frequencies. She found it cumbersome. That antenna, had she kept it, might have made the difference between clear contact with the Itasca and the fragmented transmissions that marked the final hours of flight NR 16020. One antenna, left on the ground at Leh. Some researchers believe it was the single most consequential decision of the entire flight. Here's what I find most extraordinary about this story. Not the theories, not the mystery, the silence. We live in an age where satellites track aircraft in real time, where flight recorders preserve every second of every flight, where the deepest ocean has been mapped and explored with robotic submarines. And yet, Amelia Earhart's Electra has never been found. Nearly 90 years, dozens of expeditions, millions of dollars, modern sonar, underwater drones. Nothing. The ocean around Howland Island is, in places, more than 3 miles deep. An aircraft that sank there in 1937 would have descended into absolute darkness, into crushing pressure, into water so cold and still that metal barely corrodes. It could be sitting on the ocean floor right now, largely intact, in water no human being has ever seen. The silence of the Pacific is not hostile. It is not malicious. It is simply indifferent. It does not hide things. It holds them. And it has held the secret of NR 16020 for 87 years. But here is what the silence cannot erase: what Amelia Earhart did. In an era when women were told the sky was not for them, she flew solo across the Atlantic. She crossed the Pacific from Hawaii to California, the first person, man or woman, to do so alone. She inspired a generation to believe the sky placed no limits on what they could achieve. She said once, "Adventure is worthwhile in itself." She lived that belief completely, unto its final consequence. And Fred Noonan, quiet, brilliant, underappreciated, who sat in the back of that aircraft with his charts and his sextant and his extraordinary skill, navigating toward an island he would never find. He deserves to be remembered too. The Lockheed Electra 10E is gone, but what it represented, the audacity of attempting to circle the entire world, the refusal to accept that some things are impossible, that is not gone. That has never gone. On the morning of July 2nd, 1937, the crew of the Itasca stood at their radio equipment and listened. At 8:43 a.m., the last transmission arrived. "We are on the line 157-337, and then the signal faded and did not return. Somewhere out there, an aircraft flew its last miles, perhaps circling one final time over water that looked identical in every direction, perhaps catching a glimpse, in the last moments, of a thin line of white coral, already too far, too late. We will never know exactly what those final minutes look like from inside the cockpit of NR 16020. What we know is this: on July 2nd, 1937, Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan flew into the Pacific sky, and the sky kept them. Until then, the Lockheed Electra 10E, registration NR 16020, remains the most famous missing aircraft in history. And Amelia Earhart remains exactly what she always was: unreachable, extraordinary, free. Somewhere above the Pacific, she is still flying.